Okay, good morning everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our first Spark Talk. And for those of you who don't already know, Spark Space is an innovative competition for creative, big, game-changing ideas, open to all Astrolites. And the Spark Talk is just one of many events to help you on your journey. Today, we are honored to have Eric Tachibana, who is the Professional Service Area Practice Manager for APAC, China, and Japan for AWS. He's an absolute legend. He's got loads of experience in both the startup world and large enterprises. Without further ado, I'll pass you on to Eric.
Thank you so much, Laura. And by the way, I apologize in advance. I'm just getting over a chest infection, so if I start hallucinating or pass out, that's what's happening. So don't worry. I'm so excited to see such a large crowd for the Spark Space Idea Competition. As someone who's going to be judging at the end, I'm confident that we're going to be seeing lots of really cool ideas. And today I just want to spend about an hour with you talking about those ideas. And you'll face a couple of things over the next period of time as you're preparing for the competition. You'll face two particular big challenges. The first one is you'll have 20 to 30 great ideas, and you're going to have to narrow down to a single idea. And that process could take a lot of time. And so what I want to share with you today is a mechanism to very quickly validate ideas in terms of their viability and whether or not they make a great idea for this particular competition or to roll out in Astro. So that's one thing I want to do. The other thing that you'll have to do is you're going to have to choose an idea and then put together a business model that you're going to present to the judges and hopefully win the competition and get loads of cash, right? So what I want, usually young entrepreneurs like yourselves find it very difficult to figure out what should I put into a business model so that I can present it to a panel of judges. So I want to give you a framework, really a story for that, how you do that presentation, and that'll be the second part of today. Let me quickly just grab my clicker here. I'm back on live stream. Okay, so we'll talk about those two things, business validation and business modeling. And let's go straight in. So I'm sure at some point in your career, you've heard the term value proposition. I won't make you raise hands, but I know most of you will have at some point heard that or used that term. And I'm willing to bet that many of you have slightly different versions of what that actually means. And I'm also willing to bet that most of you, if I asked you to define it, you'd have different words, but you'd come up with a basic one I did, and think for yourselves, what do you think value proposition means to you? Just take a moment while I cough. So I'm willing to bet that the idea that you had is something along the lines of a value proposition is the value that your product or service gives to a customer. And I see from the nods, that's generally what we think of. And in fact, if you were taking an MBA course and you were taking a marketing class and asked to define value proposition on an exam, that answer gets you the A, right? That's the classic, typical answer for what a value proposition means. But when we're talking about an entire business, not just a product, we're talking about an entire business, value proposition itself is more complex. And I want to walk through, actually there's 7 components, not just one, there's 7 components. And I want to walk you through that structure. Now, a value proposition certainly begins with valued. And valued is what we just talked about. You found a customer that has a deep pain, something that's causing them unhappiness. And it's a serious pain, right? And your product is going to be able to solve that pain. So firstly, it just has to be valued. And generally speaking, when we're looking at business plans and you're validating which idea is the best, I'll give you this advice is try to find something where the pain is urgent and intense. And I'll explain a little bit what I mean by that. So if I ask you how many, think to yourselves, how many of you take vitamins every morning? And very few will put their hands up. I know because I've done this with many, many audiences. We all know that vitamins are good for us, but we don't actually take them. Clearly I didn't because here I am with this, with this cough. So why is that? Why is that? Let's think about another case. Let's think about a Choi Choi event where you're having a heart attack right now. And I have a pill. And if I give you this pill, your heart attack will go away. And in fact, you'll never have a heart attack again. And if I were to sell you that pill right then as you're having a heart attack, how much would you pay for that pill? Well, you'd pay everything that you have, basically, because you're going to die if you don't, right? So in that case, that's a product which is very easy to sell, and I can have whatever price I want for it, basically as much as you have. And the reason that these two product cases are different is because the vitamin is low urgency and low intensity, meaning that when you're taking the vitamin in the morning, you're not suffering at that point in time. You haven't yet gotten sick, you're trying to prevent getting sick. And it's also low intensity because, well, you're not sick then, right? So it's not going to necessarily prevent you from keeling over and dying, right? On the other hand, the heart attack medicine, well, that's pretty urgent. If you don't take this pill right then, you're dead. And it's also very intense. It's not that you're going to get sick. It's like life or death situation. So we look at those types of products, the vitamin and the heart attack medicine, and we can see naturally, if I'm selling the heart attack medicine, that's much easier. As an entrepreneur, if I'm going to try to launch a company, I much prefer selling heart attack medicine because it's so much easier for me to sell. Why do I want to settle for a product which is low urgency and low intensity, which means I have to work really hard to sell it? Now, this is not to say that GNC isn't a billion-dollar business. You know, you can make money selling vitamins for sure. But the point is that if you have to choose an idea to go with the one that's going to be easier for you to sell, for you to market. And you measure that by asking yourself, is the pain point that I'm solving intense and urgent? And if you can answer yes to both of those, that's a good idea. Now, we said that you found a customer that has a pain that you want to solve. And the problem with that is, what if I were to say I found one customer who's willing to buy my product for #1,000,000 ringgit? Well, that's not enough. That's good, right? I'm happy to make #1,000,000 ringgit, believe me, right? But that's not enough to sustain a company. Actually, to sustain a company, you actually need to find many, many customers who all share the same problems and who are all willing to buy your product. And we call that, it's a valuable business model, meaning that you can make lots of money, and you can make lots of money over a long period of time. It's not just a one sale, but I can keep selling it over and over again to many people. So now we say a value proposition. It's two things. It's not good enough that it's valued, which is the marketing class A answer. It also has to be valuable, because now we're talking about building an actual business. Now, the third thing is, of course, we actually have to have a solution that works, right? So we call this valid. We actually have to have a solution which solves the customer pain very well. And there's sort of two aspects to this. So the first aspect is, you have to prove to me that your solution actually solves the pain points, right? And it solves it very well. Some might say better than the competitors, right? So we want to make sure first that I believe your claim. Your claim is, I have a product which solves problem X. And first thing you have to be able to convince me and yourself is that actually it can solve that problem. The second thing you need to be careful about and you need to watch for is that you want to see a one-to-one map between the features that your product or service has and the pain points that the customer is suffering from. And the reason that you want to do this is you don't want a situation where, let's say, you have 2 pain points and you have 3 product features. If you have that imbalance, that means you're spending too much money on R&D, right? Because the customer only had 2 pain points. Why are you solving for 3? You know, you're solving an extra pain point which doesn't exist, so now you're wasting money. Also, sometimes when you have too many features in a product, you just confuse your audience, right? Think of your parents and the TV remote control, right? That's not a situation where you want to be in, where you have so many features and functions that the customer themselves doesn't really know how to use your product. So be careful, always look to have a one-to-one map. If there's 3 pain points, there should also be 3 product features. Now, you also don't want the opposite. You don't want to have 3 pain points and 2 product features. That's also not a one-to-one map. And what happens when you have that imbalance is then obviously competitors have a way to fight you. Because what's happening now is your customer, you're only solving 2/3 of your customer's problem, which means actually they're left not wholly satisfied, or they're unsatisfied with your solution. It may be a good solution, it may solve most of their problems, but it doesn't solve all of their problems, and that means your competitors have the chance to come in from behind you. So remember, you don't want 3 panes and 2 features, and you don't want 2 pane and 3 features. You want that one-to-one mapping. 3 product features, 3 panes. Okay, so now we have a situation where we have discovered a real pain point in the market. A customer has hopefully a very urgent and very intense pain point. There's a lot of customers, all of them who share this common set of pains. And we've actually we've innovated a solution or a service or a product which actually solves those pain points one-to-one. 3 panes, 3 features. Now, if you think about that situation, what immediately will follow in a marketplace? What follows is competition, right? So competition we need value unique. Now, there's no word called value unique, but I need to alliterate, so we're creating a word value unique. So there you go. The thing about competition in business, but many entrepreneurs come to me and present business plans and say, the reason that I'm going to be successful is because I have no competitors. I'm free. I'm the first one. I'm gonna have a free market space, and I'll just capture more and more market share. Now, when I see that kind of a plan, it immediately goes in the dustbin right away. Because actually, if you tell me you have no competitors, you're telling me that you don't have a business. Why? Because of the state of nature. In the state of nature, it simply does not exist that there's $1 million right here on the table next to me, and there isn't 7 Indian companies and 10 Chinese companies vying for that $1 million. It can't exist. If there's actually market value to be had, there will be competitors. So it's not that as an entrepreneur, I want you to convince me that you don't have competitors. That's not the case at all. I don't want you to do that, because if you don't, it's likely that there's no value actually. What I really want from you is that you're telling me, how will I defend myself in a sustainable way once those competitors come in? So you need to have a defensive strategy. So now, if I pause, this idea of value proposition, when we're talking about an entire business and when you're validating ideas, the first thing you want to validate is there really a pain, and is it urgent and intense? If it's not, throw the idea out, go to your next one. Next, you want to say, is this valuable? Are there many customers who all share this pain who I can make money from? If the answer is no, there's only 50, throw the idea out, move to your next one. Save yourself time. Don't go into that business. Third, do I actually have a solution, which is a one-to-one mapping? That one you probably can figure out yourself, so no problem. The next one is value unique. So once I go in, do I have a mechanism by which to defend myself from the competitors? If so, cool. If not, throw the idea out and move on to the next one quickly. So these are all stage gates, if you will. As you're evaluating the 30 ideas that you're going to come up with for this competition, and you want to save yourself time, this is the way. Just chop off the ideas that don't meet these criteria. Now, all of it that we've just said so far, all of the value proposition bits that we've said so far, is really all about the promise that you're making to the market. I promise I can solve your pain. It's one thing to, from a sales and marketing perspective, to promise that you will solve a pain. It's another thing to actually deliver the solution. And when we're creating a business, you actually have to deliver this solution again and again and again. Otherwise, the business will fail. So the next thing that we need to think about is value chain. Have we thought about how we're going to implement this idea all the way from the supply of raw materials, through distribution, through manufacturing, through the sales and distribution channels, even to after sales support, and even to subsequent product sales. So that entire chain from raw materials all the way to happy customer, you need to be able to explain how you're going to actually pull that off. For example, can you get the raw materials? Maybe you're trying to find a very specialized software package that requires, there's only 10 software developers in the world that can do it, and Google and Amazon have hired them all. So now you're stuck. You actually aren't going to be able to build this thing. So think about the value chain all through the stages and prove to yourself that this is something that you guys can deliver. You can actually deliver it. And I think the most important bit of the value chain, if you will, and I think of this sort of as an overarching thread on top of the value chain, is your team itself, right? The reality is, if you have a team of 3, 4, 5 people in your team, you will not have all of the skills that are required to pull this off. In a business, you need lots and lots of different skills, and 3 or 4 people probably can't pull it off themselves. So what you need to be thinking about is, what skills and capabilities does my business actually need? Think of those as, maybe you can list them out as a list, and think about what are all the capabilities and skills that we founders have, make that list, and then do a matching to see how well you match. And there will certainly be a gap at the end. What you want to then do is figure out, who do we have to import into this team? And it could be other team members, or it could be advisors or sponsors, people that you bring in who are not necessarily part of the immediate team, but bring with them special skills that you're going to need to pull it off, and who can be part of your team as an adjunct level. So you've got to be thinking about, how can I create a holistic team that will have all the skills required to pull off my business? And it starts, usually entrepreneurs start by choosing their team. Actually, you need to be start by looking at what the business needs and then bringing in the right people to satisfy the business. Not have a team and then figure out what we want to build. It should be the opposite. The last bit is that, as we all know, that it takes money to make money, right? You're actually going to have to get investment dollars and resources and time who are going to build this solution out for you. And to do that, you have to convince budget holders or investors to put money into your idea. And what I want to mention about this is that there's a special case, which is this, is that in any company or in any investor situation, there's always lots and lots of ideas and a limited budget pool, a limited pool of investment money. And what oftentimes I see is that entrepreneurs, when they're thinking about creating a business, they're thinking, oh, I want to create a profitable business, and I'll show the investors my revenue, my costs, and how much profit I can make. And so long as I make profit, good, like we should get investment, right? Because we've actually come up with a business that's going to make money. And what they forget about is that there's actually another 20 entrepreneurs who are all vying for a small budget pool. Now the problem with this is, of course, no entrepreneur wakes up in the morning and says, hey, I have a loss-making business. You want to invest in my loss-making business? Nobody presents like that. All of them are making money. So when you think about valuation and the value that you're providing to the investor, it's not enough that you make money. It's not enough. Actually, you have to make more money for the investor than all of the other entrepreneurs who are vying for that same budget pool. Otherwise, yes, you may make money, but if the other 5 make more money than you, the investment will go there. And so even though you have a good plan, it won't get invested, right? It won't get investment money from the budget holders. So remember, think about that you have to have the highest valuation. You have to have a really attractive proposal because you have all of this competition for the same budget. So this is what we call the 7 V's, the 7 validation V's. So as you're trying to validate your own ideas, to decide which idea you want to take forward to the competition, you want to get through all those ideas fast, because otherwise you'll waste a whole bunch of time with lots and lots of creative ideas. So as you're coming up with ideas, quickly validate them against these 7 V's, right? Can I validate that there's really value? Is it really valuable? Can we make a valid solution? Can we defend ourselves in a unique way against the competitors? Can I understand the whole value chain? Do we have the right team, the right capabilities to pull this off? And can my investors make loads and loads of money? Those are the 7 V's. If the answer is no to anyone along the way, then chuck the idea. It's not going to survive. Move on very quickly to the next idea so you don't waste time on an idea which may sound really exciting, but actually as a business won't fly. So that's the validation piece. And I said we would also talk about a second bit, which is about business modeling. And when I think about the usual entrepreneur and the struggles that they face when they're trying to convert a cool idea that they have into an actual fundable business, usually the problem is that we don't exactly know what we're going to talk about. Like, we're expected to come up with a 20-minute presentation or a 15-page business plan, but we're not exactly sure what to write. So I want to quickly, in the next 30 minutes or so, walk through a story flow. And a presentation is exactly a story, right? All we're talking about, we're going to have an introduction, we're going to have some challenge, we're going to defeat the challenge, we're going to have an exit, right? It's a story flow, just like the Three Little Pigs or Star Wars is a story flow. And so I want to walk you through a story flow which works pretty well when presenting to investors, or really when just thinking about a business for yourself. And at the end of the day, the first important thing about a story is the audience, right? Because we want to tell a story that the audience is going to be excited to hear. When you're thinking about a business presentation or a business model presentation, well, your audience are investors. They're the people that you want to get money from so that you can run your business. So if the audience is the investor and you want to tell a story to the investor, then you should be telling the story that the audience wants to hear. And there's only one thing an investor cares about in the whole world, more than family, more than friends, more than changing the world, more than anything. The only thing they care about is money. That's a good investor, right? They care about money. So, but what does money equal? If you think about, let's express this as a formula. What does profit equal? Well, profit equals revenue minus cost, right? That's a pretty simple formula. The problem with this formula, though, is it's way too vague. Like, you can't really write 25 pages of business plan with that formula. It's still too vague, and I would imagine you wouldn't necessarily know what to talk about. And there's also a few, caveats to this as well. The first caveat is that, well, profit is revenue minus cost, given that I believe you can implement it, that you can implement that over a long period of time, and that I can get my money out. I can exit this business. I can take money out of the business. It's not enough just to put money in and have a promise of ROI. I actually have to take the money back out for me to get the returns. And we also said that it's given the fact that the money we can make from your venture is greater than the money that we can do from all other ventures that are vying for the same pool. We've already mentioned that before. So at the end of the day, the story, profit equals revenue minus cost, that's what the investor wants to hear from you when you're presenting those business plan ideas at the very end. But again, since it's vague, I want to go a little bit deeper. And let's talk first about cost. I think that's an easier one. So if profit equals revenue minus cost, how might we express cost as a formula? I would be willing to bet that actually in 99% of the business cases that you're going to develop for SparkSpace, it will be made up of these three components. The first one is people. Actually, that's probably in Astro style ideas, people will be the biggest cost that you face. But you'll also have production, the creation of that idea. Maybe in an Astro, that could be the cost of IP, of the content that you're bringing in, right? That's how do I produce the service that we're gonna launch. And there's also the sales and marketing, the promotion of it, and there's also the place where we actually deliver that product or service, and that will depend on your business. But if you think about it, those four components, and I know with cost, there's things like amortization and depreciation and tax. I'll tell you what, all that stuff doesn't matter. 99% of your cost model is in these four variables alone. So if you can think about what you're going to build, let's say you're going to build a new software service to distribute movies real time. Then how many people do you need? You can probably, you all agree you can figure that out? How much will you need to spend on marketing? Generally speaking, you'll actually have that data in Astro from other products that you've released. How much will it cost to build? Again, you can figure that out for the ideas that you guys are going to be presenting. But I still want to go one more level deep, and I want to talk about cost models. So if we just take the first P, which is people cost, and how do we break that down? How would, as a formula, we come up with the people cost? Well, it's probably something like this. It's the number of people times the cost per person, right? That's basically how we would generate people cost. Now, as a cost model developer or as a business owner, you want to drive that down, right? You want the lowest cost possible because then you have higher profits. So really, we want to do two things. Either in our cost model, we want to reduce headcount, or we want to reduce cost per person, which is basically reducing salary or reducing other costs. So the question is, well, okay, how do we do that? And I know, of course, many of you, well, fire people, right? Outsource people. Those are the obvious ways that you're going to do that. But actually, there's dozens or hundreds of different creative ways in a cost model that you can reduce cost over time. You can automate, you can put Lean Six Sigma processes into your operations, you can get economies of scale. There's actually dozens of different ways that you can affect the cost model. And I think of it like, in my imagination, I think of it like a machine. And the machine has levers and dials and buttons. And your job as the entrepreneur designing a cost model is to figure out what is the best setup of all of my buttons, levers, and dials. I'm going to turn this dial to 5, I'm going to press this button, I'm going to depress that button, I'm going to move the lever halfway down. And so your role is to figure out, how do I use all of these different variables to get costs down while maintaining the basic level of quality that your business needs. And that's your role as an entrepreneur. And when you think about that, that is what we want to know as audience members or evaluators of your business plan, is not so much what's your cost, but what are your assumptions about your cost model? How are you artistically putting all of these variables in play so that you can keep the cost as far down as possible while maintaining the same level of quality? So that's what we're talking about with cost. Does that make sense? If I ask you, now, could you explain a cost model? What? Well, we're talking about costs. Yeah, just for people cost. Yeah, okay, I see heads nodding, so I think we're in a good stead. So actually, that's the first thing that we want to talk about in the business plan, and I think you're okay with that. Now, remember we said profit equals revenue minus cost, and so far we've taken cost and we've said cost is equal to P plus P plus P plus P, and you guys have all said, yeah, I think we can talk about those costs. We can explain our thinking about those costs, but we haven't yet talked about revenue. Revenue, if we express that as a formula, is actually equal to price times volume, right? That's a pretty simple formula. Now, I think you know I'm very anal about my slides, and there's no way I would have 2 spaces in between the equal sign and the parentheses, so there's definitely something missing here. And what's missing is actually entrepreneurial psychology. It's your psychology. Entrepreneurs have deep love and deep passion for the projects that they're doing. And I want that. I want you to have deep love and deep passion, because I'm going to be asking you to give up your boyfriends and girlfriends and wives and children and husbands, no life, no health, no nothing. I want you to give up all of that to make me money, right? So as an investor looking at entrepreneurs, actually that's what I want from you. I want that passion and that love for what you're doing. Unfortunately, when you have passion and love, the problem is you also have blinders. Right? Suddenly, you can't see to the right or left. All you can do is look at the thing that you're so passionate about, and you'll miss all of the things that happen to the sides. And I'll tell you about a story about a company that suffered from these blinders, and that was Creative. Creative was actually the very first company to come up with the innovation of the MP3, long before Apple. It was actually Creative that came up with this thing. And they had a product called the Zen Jukebox. I had at least 4 or 5 of those because I really liked them. So I had all sorts of Zen Jukeboxes. Now, as we know, most of you probably don't remember Creative anymore, and that's because they never made it. And so why didn't they make it? They were the first ones to come up with the MP3. They did create a very good product. I loved it. I thought it was a great product, but they didn't succeed. And the reason is because they had these blinders. They looked at the innovation of the MP3 and said, oh, we see a player, and we fall in love with the player. We're going to market the player. We're going to build features into the player, but that's all we see. Now let's look at a different company. The different company is Apple. Apple looked at the innovation of MP3, and they did see a player. So there was an iPod. They did see a player. But that's not all they saw. That's not all they focused on. Instead, they said, actually, there's a halo of revenue opportunities which are surrounding this product. And there's a huge amount of money. In fact, there's more money in the product halo than there is in the product itself. If you think about how much money Apple has made off the innovation of the MP3, it's not only from the iPod, right? We have iPads, we have iPhones, we have the App Store, we have iTunes, we have red and orange and green earbuds, we have car chargers. They're making money hand over fist from every single thing that was generated from the innovation of the MP3. And poor creative just said, oh, I see the player, I'm going to invest in the player, and that's it. So Apple made hundreds of times more money because they said, I'm not going to get focused, I'm not going to have blinders and only focus on my innovation. I'm going to look at every single revenue stream which is created because of the innovation, and I'm going to take a little bit of money from each of those streams. That creates a giant company. So why I say this, is when you're thinking about the formula for revenue, I want you to be thinking not just about the revenue of your product. Most entrepreneurs will just focus on the revenue of the product itself. Don't do that. Think about it as the summation of all of the revenue streams which are generated because of my product, price times volume. So as you're describing, as you're thinking about this product, remember the second V is valuable. We want to make a lot of money. Be thinking about how you can grab money from all sorts of different revenue streams. Don't just rely on one revenue stream. Okay, so let's dive even further though, because I think it's still slightly too vague for you to be able to write anything about. And I want to talk about price. So ask yourselves and think, what is the most you can charge for any product? Now it won't be a number. It can't be something like $59.99 because, well, can you charge $60? You know, if I have a different product or whatever else. So it can't be a number. It has to be something else. So how much, what's the most you can charge for a product? The most you can charge is how much the customer will pay. And in marketing, we call that customer perceived value. It's how much the customer perceives your product is worth. And if you charge more than that, well, they won't buy it because they'll be thinking to themselves, well, the cost is more than the value that I get. So for any product, the highest you can charge is customer perceived value. Now, what's the lowest you can charge for a product? Now, I know there's lots of exotic solutions, lost leadership and freemium and all of these things, these exotic mechanisms. But what I will tell you is this, as an entrepreneur, focus on making money. So don't have a cost which is lower than your cost to produce. I mean, which is higher than your cost to produce. Otherwise, you'll lose money, right? So if you think of it like this, price is a spectrum. At the top is customer perceived value. That's the most you can charge. At the bottom is the cost to produce. You can't go below that, otherwise you'll lose money. So when you're thinking about, okay, how do I understand price? What I don't want you to do is say, $6.99, I don't know, I'm just making it up, it feels good. That's a terrible way to set price. A terrible way to set price also is, I'll take my competitor's price and I'll drop it by 10%. That's also a very weak form of price setting. Another one is, what's my cost to produce? Plus 10%. That's also a wimpy way to think about price. Now, what happens when you've found a real pain point in the market and you've developed a solution for it? What immediately follows in the marketplace, which we've said before? Competitors. Competitors will come in. And then the question is, what is the effect of the competitors on price? Well, the effect of the competitors on price, obviously, is to push price down. The more competitors come in, the harder it is to maintain a high price. So if you think about the effect of competition, it's really to push price down. But of course, entrepreneurs, we don't just give up and say, okay, we'll drop price, competitors win. We would never say that. Instead, we fight. And we fight through competitive positioning. And competitive positioning could be things like, we're going to differentiate our features. We're going to go into a different segment of the market. We're going to change, be nimble based upon the demands and the effects of the competitors that are coming in. So we have a competitive positioning strategy, and that's how we put a barrier. That's how we stop this downward pressure on price when it comes to competitors. Now, earlier I said that the most you can charge for a product is the customer perceived value. And that, by the way, was a lie. And that was a lie because actually you can charge more than that. And the key word to be thinking about here is perceived, right? The highest you can charge is customer perceived value. How do you charge more than that? You have to change their perception. And that's why you can imagine we have this really slick black car with leather seats goes 0 to 60 in 3 seconds or whatever it is, maybe it's worth $100,000. Well, if you drape a really hot bikini-clad babe on the front, well, it's going to be worth more money to the buyer, right? Because suddenly the guy is thinking, oh, not only can I have a cool car, but maybe I'll get a girlfriend out of it. So what we're doing is we're basically using marketing and PR strategy and branding to brainwash the customer into thinking that, oh, actually, this product is worth more than I thought it was worth. So the way that you increase the highest rate that you can charge is simply by brainwashing the customer. And you do that through branding and PR strategy. We also said before that cost to produce was the lowest that we could charge for a product, and that too was a lie. Actually, you can go below that, not by giving a product away for free and losing money. I'm not talking about that still. But what you can do is you can implement new Six Sigma processes in your manufacturing plant. You can enjoy economies of scale by producing more. You can outsource. There's a huge number of things. Remember, we talked about the cost model before. There's a huge number of things that we can do to optimize our operations. And that's how we reduce costs to produce. So now if you think about price, the way that you talk about price is not to guess at a price out of the blue. It's to understand customer perceived value and what you are doing to manipulate customer perceived value. At the bottom, it's cost to produce, and what you're doing as a manager to optimize cost to produce, and the effect of competitors and how you differentiate yourself. Now, that's why so many entrepreneurs, when they're asked, how do you determine your price, they say, $6.99, a guess. That's why they do that, because this is hard. If you look at the bottom of that entire sweep is practically an entire MBA program just to figure out price. However, if you break it down like this and you think critically to yourselves about what your strategies as an entrepreneur will be, well, it's describable. It's something that you can do. It is hard work, but it's something that you can do. So are we all cool with that you guys could talk about price? Okay, good, nodding heads. Yes, everything is good. Let's talk more about volume. So wouldn't it be nice, like, why is it that we don't just sell to everybody in the world? Like, shouldn't that be our goal? Is that we're simply going to sell to everybody in the world? Well, we know it would be nice, but we know that it's probably not possible because there is no company. Even Coca-Cola doesn't sell to everybody in the world, for goodness sakes, right? There is no product which can sell to everybody. And the question is, why? Right? Why not? Well, it starts with the fact that customers are problematic. Some customers don't like Coke. They like Pepsi, or they like tea. They like something else, but they don't like Coke. So the problem is that all the customers out there have different wants and needs themselves. And so it's impossible to sell a single product to everybody because everybody wants their own unique tailored version of the product. They don't want the core product. And if you think about how could I tailor unique products for everyone, like I know Coca-Cola had that program where they put names on the bottles. That's where they were trying to customize and tailor, right? But they still can't come up with every darn name in the world. It's just not going to work. But in order to do that, you have real manufacturing concerns. Like, it's very hard to create one manufacturing facility that can output 100% unique products every single time, right? It's impossible to put together that kind of a manufacturing plant. So at the end of the day, the reason that we don't actually try to sell to everybody in the world is because there are these realities about running a business that make it impossible for us to market a single product to everybody in the world. So the question is, what do marketers do? Well, the way that they do it is then they say, instead of marketing to everybody in the world, let's choose a segment of the market, a set of people in the market who we think it's easier to sell to, who have this pain more profoundly, who will pay us more money. They decide, let's segment the entire market into smaller chunks, and then we'll focus on those chunks which are the most interesting, the most lucrative, the most easy to access, maybe the lowest hanging fruit. Now the question is, well, how do you do that, right? How would you go about segmenting a market? I think if I asked you, most of you would say something like, for example, well, we could sell to 18 to 25-year-old men in Klang Valley. Something like this, right? We call this demographics. This is gender, this is the age group, this is something like this. So there's demographics, right? We also, well, in the Klang Valley, right? We could sell North Asia, South Asia. We could sell rural, urban. These are geographic segments. So you have demographic segments like age and gender and educational background, income level. We have geographics, which is where they're actually located. We also have psychographics, which is how they think, how they feel, how their needs, their values, their visions and goals in life. This is how they think about themselves. We can also segment a market based on that. Actually, we can segment a market in an infinite number of ways. This is one of my favorite parts of coming up with a business model, because this is art, not science. You can actually have two companies with the exact same product, the exact same level of team, the exact same level to implement. But if they choose different segments, one company will do better than the other. And so it's this artistic process of coming up with what's the best segment, which to me is one of the most fun parts about coming up with a business plan, because it is truly artistic and it's unique to the entrepreneurs that are doing it. So that's how we segment. So remember we said that revenue is price times volume, summation across all the revenue streams, and we've talked about price. We still have to talk about volume, which is essentially the size of the segments that you've decided to choose. So in a marketing context, we have two ideas. The first idea is called a beachhead, and I'm sure many of you have seen World War II movies like Saving Private Ryan or Band of Brothers or one of these things. And when you saw those movies, when the Allies invaded Europe, where did they invade? Think back to those movies and where did they invade? They didn't come in through Portugal. They didn't come in through Italy. Actually, they came in through France, through a very specific place, which was Normandy. In fact, they came from the beaches of Normandy. And that, by the way, is where beachhead marketing, the term, literally comes from World War II strategy. Now, why did they just come through Normandy? Why didn't they land a paratrooper at every mile from Denmark all the way down Portugal and Spain and up through Italy and Greece? So why did they not do that? And then they'd have one poor soldier land, then what would they do, right? They'd be overwhelmed by the enemy because there's only one poor guy by himself. So instead, beachhead strategy says, don't spread your forces thin. Bring all of your forces together to focus on one spot in the market, and you absolutely use overwhelming force to conquer that spot in the marketplace. So you choose your segment and then you go straight after your segment. And this is what we call beachhead marketing. And the next question is, once you have that beachhead, then what do you do? In World War II, once you've conquered the beaches of Normandy, do you then send paratroopers into Poland or into Athens? No, you wouldn't do that, right? Because then, again, those poor paratroopers are going to be all alone in the middle of Europe somewhere with no supply line and no help. They're definitely going to get shot to pieces. Instead, you say, let's start at the beaches of Normandy and move slowly to consecutive areas of the map so that we can control an additional area and then defend that as well. And if you think about it visually, you have the beachhead and then you have consecutive markets. It begins to look like bowling pins set up, and that's what we call bowling pin strategy. Bowling pin strategy is essentially your strategy as to, once you capture your beachhead segment, what segment do you go after next? And I'll give you a more specific example. Let's say that you're selling CRM software to multinational banks in Malaysia. So you start and you're going to say, that's my beachhead segment. I'm selling to multinational banks in Malaysia. And then we conquer that. And what would your next move? Do you then sell the CRM to hospitals? No. You're going to do something like, okay, I've got MNC banks. Now I'm going to sell to large local banks like Maybank in Arab Malaysia, right? And then you're going to say, okay, I go from banks to insurance companies and maybe wealth managers, right? So what we're doing is we're taking the initial segment, and my bowling pin segments are all related to the original segment that I went after. And that's what when we say bowling pin strategy. So essentially, as you're thinking about the beachhead and bowling pin, the beachhead should be the segment that you can go after, which is maybe the easiest to conquer or which has the greatest value, but whatever the case, should be a low-hanging fruit in the market. And then you add to it the bowling pin segments. And generally speaking, I would tell you as entrepreneurs, when you're coming up with your business plan for Spark Spaces, don't do more than maybe 2 or 3 bowling pin segments, because generally speaking, as entrepreneurs, when we're rolling out a business, we probably can only capture 1 segment every year and a half. It takes that long. Like, just to capture a particular market space, it takes a while to build the brand, to do the sales, to generate case studies. It takes about a year and a half. So if you think about a 5-year plan, well, you probably can't do more than 3 or a maximum 4 segments in a 5-year plan, because you'll run out of time. So I wouldn't necessarily choose many bowling pin segments. Just choose a few and talk us through what's your plan to grab the first beachhead and then a few subsequent bowling pin segments after that. So this is a slightly more scary formula, but it represents what we've just been talking about. So volume is going to be equal to your beachhead size times share. That's the size of the beachhead market times the share that you get, plus the summation of all of the bowling pin markets that you go after. Again, size times share. So we have to talk about a couple of variables. The first one is, let's talk about size. So for your beachhead market, you're going to have to determine how large that market is. So in our example of the CRM for banking software, well, that's easy. You can count on your one hand the number of multinational banks in Malaysia today. You can count that. Then we go to large local. Again, you know all the large local banks. That's a particularly easy one. But let's say that you wanted to go after all of the men in the Klang Valley that like Game of Thrones, right? That could be a harder study to do, but it's definitely a study that you can do and you can get the answers to. In fact, what I would say is, if you want to talk about market sizing, the best thing to do is head over to the library of whatever school you graduated from, bring some chocolates and flowers to the librarian, and actually they can help you get most of the data that you could ever possibly want. There's free Gartner, free Forrester, all of that stuff is there for you. You know, you can go and just grab access to it and get everything that you need. So that's size. So I hope you agree that with a little bit of elbow grease, you could figure out the size of pretty much any market that you guys want to go after. And again, I see nobody is shaking their head. Everyone's saying, yeah, we can. Share. There's not I don't have a great formula to market share. What I would say is try to use something between 20% and 35%. And let me explain why. So the first part is, you know, some people may say, we actually don't need that much market share. If I only have 1% of the China market, wow, I can be a billionaire already, right? And what we see is, well, no one actually implements that strategy in real life. And the reason comes back to primary school. When you were in primary school, there was certainly one poor little geeky, out of shape guy with glasses. You know, he's the small one on the playing field. And what happens to that guy? Well, he gets beaten up by all the bullies. And this is what happens in marketplaces. If your market share is too small, then essentially the big guy will come along and say, yeah, they'll stamp you out, they'll kill you, they'll defeat you in the marketplace. They have lots of mechanisms to do that because they're big and you're small. You can't defend yourself. So what I would say, generally speaking, you need a certain size so that you can survive. And I would say if you're below 20%, you start to get so small that you're easy to defeat by the bigger players. So think about a market share that's a little bit above 20. Now, why do I say 35 at the top? I say 35 at the top because in most markets, which are not monopoly markets, and I know in Asia there are monopoly markets, but in markets which are not monopoly, generally speaking, if you think about those markets, there will generally be 3 to 4 big players who will all take that market together. There could be a few small guys around the edges, but generally any market that's sizable will end up having 3 or 4 big players. If you think about the businesses that you know, you will agree it's something like that. And so for me, assuming that there's 3 or 4 big players and you're one of them, to me it's a bit boastful to say I'm going to get more than 35% market share. Because hey, quite boastful. If there's 3 other big companies that are sharing this space with you, how can you possibly get more than 35%? Because realistically, markets will divvy up into 3 or 4 equal-sized players. So generally what I say is, the share that you should assume should be somewhere between 20% and 35%. Below 20, you'll get smashed by the bullies. Above 35, hard for me to believe that you can actually, as an entrepreneur, capture more than 35% of that share. Does that make sense? So we're all okay in terms of size and share. Good. Share, of course, it's 100% minus the uninterested buyers and minus the competitors. I should have given you that formula before. Okay, so that's basically the formula. If you think about it, we've covered profit equals revenue minus cost. We've said cost is the 4 P's. We've said that revenue is price times volume summation. We've said price is the customer perceived value, cost to produce, effective competitors, increased customer perceived value, decreased cost to produce, right? We've said volume is the beachhead, size times share, plus all the bowling pin size times share. So that's actually most of the formula so far. But remember at the beginning, we also talked about implementability, sustainability, and exit. And I want to talk very first about implementability. Implementability is really my belief that you can actually pull off this business. That's what you're trying to prove. And maybe we kind of come back to the value chain part of the 7 V's. I want to believe that you can actually do this. Now, here's a trick for when you guys present in your Spark space to the judges. Most entrepreneurs start with this. They start their business plan with this. Let me tell you about my cool product. Let me tell you about my cool team. All the great things that we've come up with. Oh, we have PhDs and we have, blah, 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 masters, and etc. And they focus on this part of the business plan first. Actually, if you think about the story that the investor wants to hear, it's all about the stuff we've spoken about earlier. This stuff to me is almost appendices items. It's extra. Like, you have to prove to me that you can make money before we even talk about this slide. And maybe we'll talk about this slide in a subsequent meeting. If you can convince me that your business model works, then let's talk about your team, your product, your processes, and all of the rest of it. But generally speaking, these 7 P's here are the things that we want to do when we're proving that we can actually make this thing work. And we talked about sustainability. Sustainability is basically how long this market will exist, right? As well as how long I can defend myself in this market. So think back bubble tea, right? Bubble tea was really big, then really not big, right? So markets have span of times when they're alive. Obviously, Coca-Cola has had a really, really long streak. Horseshoes, once Henry Ford came in, they were all gone. And so you think about the lifespan of each market has a lifespan. And when you're thinking about which idea you want to go with, obviously you want to go with an idea which is going to have a really, really long lifespan, because then you can milk more and more money out of that over time. And you also want to pick something that you can reasonably defend vis-a-vis the competitors. So if we look at market lifespan, let's just take that one. That's essentially how fast the technology is changing as well as how fast the market is commoditizing. So the first one is, well, there's not much of a market anymore for floppy disks, right? You probably don't even remember floppy disks, you're all too young. But if technology changes very fast, such that your business becomes out of date, then that business is going to disappear. Similarly speaking, we don't want a business which is quickly commoditizing, or basically where our price is being forced to its lowest point. That's not a very attractive business either. And so when we're thinking about sustainability and market lifespan, those are the 2 areas. The last bit is about competitive defense. And I think this is the most fun part of competitive defense. So again, ask you a question that you think about this in your head. What is better? To have a barrier to entry which is low or which is high? I think most of you will say high barrier to entry. Actually, the best is a low barrier to entry, then I get in, and then suddenly it's a high barrier to entry, no one else can come in. That's the best, right? How do we achieve that? Many entrepreneurs will focus on intellectual property, for example. I find intellectual property, it is a barrier to entry. It does stop people from coming in because now you have a patent or a copyright which protects you legally. But I find, generally speaking, that for entrepreneurs, IP is not a very successful barrier to entry because, well, frankly speaking, you may have the patent, but do you have the money required to hire the lawyer to defend the patent? Probably not, right? So IP is a very tough one. Instead, I prefer barriers to entry that involve lock-in of the supply chain. And so I'll give you an example. If today you go to Tesco or you go to cold storage, you go to some supermarket and you go to the toothpaste aisle, what do you see? Well, you see 20 different SKUs or 20 different brands of Colgate, right? That's all that you see. There's fresh mint gel, cool mint gel, whitening, baking soda, but it's all just different versions of Colgate. What I'll tell you is that Colgate only makes money in 2 of those SKUs. All of the other SKUs either break even or lose money. So why is it that Colgate would continue to launch all of these products into the supermarket even though they know they're not going to make money? Well, the answer is actually real estate. What they're trying to do is they're trying to stock the shelves with Colgate such that no competitor can actually get their competitive toothpaste into the supermarkets. So long as the supermarket has no shelf space, we guarantee that the competitors will not be able to get in. And so when Colgate signs up with the supermarkets, their agreement, they say, we will supply you with these 2 SKUs of Colgate, which will make a lot of money, but you have to agree to include all of these terrible, boring dog products as well, so that it takes up the shelf space. So Colgate has those relationships with the supermarket, and what they're trying to do is lock in at the distribution level. They want to make sure that no distributor will distribute a competitive product because they're just basically full of their own. Another example, also in the customer space, is in Singapore, where I come from, everybody has a free mobile phone. No one would buy a mobile phone because essentially all of the telcos will give you a package. I'll give you a free iPhone, but you have to agree to sign up for 3 or 5 years, and if you move to another telco, we take your firstborn child or something like this, right? There's some penalty along the way. And so that's an example where we're locking in the customers contractually, right? We can sue them if they do something different. So again, a barrier to entry, because now I've locked in the customer, I've locked in the distributor, and customers can't get in. So these are much more powerful barriers to entry. And on the other side of the supply of the value chain is the supply of raw materials. If you're building a product which requires copper today, I can guarantee you cannot go to the mines in Australia and New Zealand to get copper anymore. Impossible, because the Chinese have purchased 70 years of forward contracts with all of the mines for copper. You have to buy from China because they own all the copper now. So they have control. So you can think, if I can control the supply of the raw materials, then even if the competitor has a better product, they still can't market it because they can't build it because I own the supply, right? So think about barriers to entry as lock in every point along the value chain: supply, manufacturing, distribution, after sales support, all of those bits you want to lock in. Lock in. Once you lock in, barriers to entry are high. So let's come to the second one, which is barriers to exit. So the same question again is, should you have high barriers to exit or low barriers to exit, right? So most people, generally, I won't do it here, but and I know some people have taken CIP, so you know the answer. Most people will say, we want low barriers to exit because we want to be able to exit if things are going badly, right? I know a lot of you in your head were thinking, so we can exit. That's the wrong answer. It is true we want low barriers to exit, but not because we want to exit. Because we're entrepreneurs. We're not going to lose. We're going to win. You have to assume you're going to be winning, right? No reason why I need to be running away. Actually, we're going to win. But you still want low barriers to exit, not because you're going to escape, but because your competitors need to escape. And we think about these 2 scenarios. The first one is, you're a gladiator fighting another gladiator, and all around you is a field of grass and flowers, and you're chopping and blocking, and you're about to win. You're about to chop off the other gladiator's head. And so what does that other gladiator do? Well, he runs away because he doesn't want to die, right? But it's fine because there's grass and flowers all around. He runs. So I say, I am the dominant king gladiator of the world. Yeah, I win. So I changed the situation. Now what we're talking about is you're two gladiators again, but this time you're 200 feet down in a pit with all granite walls around, which is impossible to climb. No way to escape. And you're doing it, and you're fighting the other gladiator, and you're about to chop off his head, and what does he do? He fights to the death, right? Because he has no other choice. He can't run now. And in a market, what does fighting to the death mean? It means a price war, right? So now I chop off his head. Ha! I am the king gladiator of all, and now I am champion of my market space with a profit margin of 0.000001. But who wants to win a marketplace like that? It's useless, right? I don't want to win a marketplace with a margin that's so thin that I can't make any money. So price wars are awful. They're good for customers, terrible for entrepreneurs, right? So the reason you want a low barrier to exit is because actually you're not going to escape. It's your competitor who's going to escape, but let them escape without destroying the market behind them. So the reason we want low barriers to exit is that. Okay, so the last bit, right? We had implementability, sustainability, and exit. The last bit is exit. And remember that what you don't want to do is invest a whole lot of money and never get any returns, right? You may have a very, successful company, but if you don't get your money back, it was pointless. So all investors want to get returns, and there's only 4 ways that they can get those returns. The first way is a spin out, right? So this is, so what we're saying here is Astro is going to create an idea, a product. It will incubate it within Astro, and then we spin it out into its own company. And then, of course, we benefit from all those returns. That's one. When you're building that kind of a company, it's in many ways, it's a lot about the promise. It's kind of like IPOing something. We have to believe that this thing is going to be its own company, a giant property just in itself. And when you do that, you build that company in a very specific way. Right? It needs to be a type of company that has a big vision and that's supported by big possibilities. Second way is a trade sale. So in that, again, we create a company, we incubate it inside, and instead of spinning it out into its own company, we sell it as a bit to another company. That's another way, and then hopefully we'll get a good valuation on that deal, and we make loads of money. Now again, similarly, spin out is about the promise, trade sale is about the synergy. Because remember, the buying company needs to say, oh, if I buy this unit from Astro, I can have 1 + 1 = 3, because when I include it with my own portfolio of assets, suddenly my assets are more valuable. So when you're building that type of a company that's going to spin out, you're thinking to yourself, how do I create synergy? We also have a dividend type of a company. A dividend type of a company is where you keep your product inside of Astro, and then you just enjoy all of the revenue and the profits every year, year after year for the next 50 years. And the last one is a liquidation, where you build a company, raise it up, and then kill it and sell off all the assets, and then we just take all of those proceeds. That's it. There's only those 4 type of companies that can be built, there are only 4 mechanisms to exit. And the thing to think about here is that each of those has to be formed in a different way. A company that you're going to spin out is built differently than a company that you want to trade sale, is built differently from a company that you expect dividends over a long period of time. They're all built in different ways. And so actually, you need to figure out your exit now. Before you've created the whole business model, you need to know how I'm going to exit this business so you can communicate to the investors how they get their money back. Okay, we said at the very beginning that we wanted to tell a story to the investors of how they were going to make money. And we said that that story was essentially profit equals revenue minus cost, given implementability, sustainability, and exit. And you all said, yeah, that makes sense, but it's still a little vague. So what we need to do is break this down a little bit. And so we said, let's break cost down first. So we said, actually, profit is revenue minus the 4 Ps, people, production, promotion, and place. And we talked about cost models, and you all said, yeah, we could talk about that if we have to put together a business plan presentation. And then we said, all right, let's break down revenue. So revenue actually was the summation of all my revenue streams, price times volume. So now profit equals summation of price times volume minus the 4 P's given implementability, sustainability, and exit. And you all said, yeah, I saw you nodding. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, we're good. And then we said, listen, actually, the volume is actually beachhead market share plus bowling pin market share. So we made that substitution. And again, you said, yeah, that makes sense. I can talk about my volume in terms of these two things. And we also said, hey, price is customer perceived value is greater than price, which is greater than cost to produce. And we, with competitive positioning and all of the rest. And you guys all said, yeah, we can pretty much talk about how these things implement price. So that right there, that horrible formula in red, which I know looks horrible, is actually very easy to talk about. And this formula in red is exactly the story of profitability. This explains to the investor how you're going to make money variable by variable. And the nice thing is, all along the way, you all have agreed, yeah, I can talk about this variable. Yeah, it makes sense. I know the formula in red looks terrible, but actually it's built upon all small things which you can all discuss. So when you think about your presentation at the end of SparkSpace, you think about the business model that you're going to create, this is your template. Just walk us through how you get profitability through all of these variables, and you'll be telling us the exact story that we want to hear. Good luck. I know it's going to be a lot of work. AWS, we are here running the innovation program, including the CIP, of which many of you are graduates from level 1. We're available anytime. You guys can email me at any time, and I'm happy to give you comments along the way as you're building out your ideas for SparkSpace. I, of course, will be a judge as well, so you can learn what things I'm going to be looking for, and I encourage you to do that. And thank you very much for attending today. And now to close out.